Caleb had always hated winters in northern Minnesota, but this year he couldn't avoid them. His uncle left him the old family cabin after passing away, a structure so deep in the woods it felt more isolated than abandoned towns. It was supposed to be a temporary getaway to clear his head, finish some remote work, and reset his life after a rough breakup. A few weeks alone didn't sound bad. The road leading into the forest was already half buried in snow by the time he arrived. The trees leaned over the narrow path like they were guarding something behind them. When Caleb finally saw the cabin, he felt a strange tightness in his chest. He chalked it up to nostalgia. The last time he'd been here, he was 10. Back then, the cabin felt magical. Now, it looked like the kind of place where people disappeared. The first night was quiet. Too quiet. No wind, no cracks of ice in the trees. Just a thick, heavy silence he hadn't realized was possible outdoors. At around 1 a.m., Caleb woke up for no obvious reason. He wasn't cold, he wasn't restless, but something felt wrong. Then he noticed it. The faintest crunch of snow outside, slow and deliberate, moving toward the cabin. His rational brain said it was an animal, a deer, maybe a fox. But then the steps stopped, directly beneath his bedroom window. Caleb didn't move, didn't breathe. Whoever or whatever it was stood there for a full 30 seconds. He counted every heartbeat. The silence broke with a single sound, a dragging noise, like something being pulled through the snow. He wanted to look, but he couldn't bring himself to pull back the curtain. When morning came, he forced himself outside to check. No footprints, no tracks, just smooth, untouched snow. He almost convinced himself he imagined everything until he walked to the side of the cabin. There, carved into the wood with something sharp, were 3 symbols. Straight lines. Even spacing. Not words. Not letters, just marks. And they hadn't been there the day before. Caleb swallowed hard. Maybe a hunter wandering through. Maybe bored teenagers from town hiking up here to mess with him. But the carving was fresh. The wood still splintered outward. Whoever made it had done so only hours earlier. He rubbed his thumb over the grooves and felt a strange coldness that didn't match the temperature. A wrongness. That night he locked every door, pushed furniture against the front entrance, and kept a heavy flashlight under his pillow. He had no idea that the next night would be worse. Much worse. Caleb woke up the second night before anything even happened. His body jolted awake like his subconscious already knew something was wrong. It was 2:47 a.m., the kind of hour that felt deliberately chosen for nightmares. He didn't hear footsteps at first, just silence. A thick, suffocating stillness pressing against the cabin walls. He got out of bed and moved to the window, staring out into the black forest. No wind, no movement, no sound. Then, all at once, the forest seemed to exhale. Crunch. A single step. This time it was on the front porch. Caleb froze. Whoever had been outside the night before was now closer, much closer. The porch boards creaked softly, barely audible, but impossible to ignore. Slow steps moved from one side of the porch to the other. Pausing, listening, testing the weight distribution of each plank like the person had walked this porch many times before. Caleb reached instinctively for his phone. No service. The nearest ranger station was nearly an hour away on a good day. In a storm? Forget it. The front door handle rattled. It wasn't subtle or gentle. Someone twisted it like they expected it to open easily. When it didn't, the shaking grew louder. Faster, more impatient. Caleb backed away and grabbed the heavy flashlight he kept under his pillow. A long pause followed. Then 3 knocks. Slow, even, calm. He didn't answer. The knocks came again. Same rhythm, same deliberate timing. Like someone communicating. After the 3rd sequence, the handle rattled harder than before. This time, the entire door trembled. Caleb held his breath, watching the small metal latch jiggle with each violent shake. For a second, he truly believed the door might give out. And then silence. Long, agonizing silence. Caleb forced himself to take one step toward the entryway, then another. When he finally reached the peephole, he hesitated. He didn't want to look. He didn't want a face to be staring back at him through the warped glass. He looked. There was no one. Just the dark porch and the drifting snow. He waited several minutes before backing away. For the next hour, he sat in the center of the living room, gripping the flashlight like a weapon, jumping at every small creak of the cabin settling. He didn't sleep the rest of the night. When morning finally came, Caleb stepped outside cautiously. Fresh snow lay across the porch, and in it, clear as day, were footprints. Bare footprints. Human. They led to the door, paced around the porch, and then continued toward the back of the cabin before disappearing into the heavy brush. But something else made Caleb's stomach drop. There were two sets of footprints, one set larger, one smaller, as if a second person had been standing just behind the first, watching. He walked around to the back wall of the cabin, dread growing with each step. Sure enough, carved next to last night's symbols were 3 new ones, slanted, intersecting lines forming a pattern that almost looked like a warning, or a countdown. The rest of the day passed in tense, restless pacing. Caleb kept checking the windows, expecting someone to appear between the trees. When evening approached, he considered packing up and driving back to town. But he knew the truth. If whoever was out there wanted him gone, they wouldn't give him a quiet escape. That night, he left every light in the cabin on. It didn't help. At 3:11 a.m., the knocking returned. This time on the bedroom window. 3 knocks, just like before. Caleb's blood ran ice cold. He crouched down and crawled to the opposite wall, listening. The knocks repeated, moving along the exterior wall, traveling from one window to the next. Someone was circling the cabin, tapping on every glass pane as they passed by. Then they stopped directly outside his bedroom again. A voice spoke, soft, muffled by the glass, calm, almost friendly. "Are you alone in there?" Caleb couldn't reply. He couldn't even breathe. The voice repeated the question slower this time. "Are you alone?" He squeezed his eyes shut, praying the voice would go away. It did. But not before whispering, "We'll come back when you're ready." Caleb didn't sleep at all after that. He didn't know what ready meant, or why the voice said we, but he would soon. Caleb spent the next morning packing his belongings in a frantic haze. He didn't care about the research anymore. He didn't care about the cabin he'd spent years restoring. All he wanted was distance, miles of it, between himself and whatever had circled his home in the freezing dark. But when he tried starting his truck, the engine didn't turn over. Not even a click. He popped the hood and felt his stomach sink. Someone had cut the battery cables clean through. The edges weren't frayed, they were sheared with something sharp. Precise. He wasn't leaving, not easily anyway. Caleb slammed the hood shut and scanned the woods. The silence felt heavier than before, like the forest was waiting for him to notice something else. And he did. Strange lines carved into the trees surrounding the cabin. They were deep, deliberate marks forming the same shapes he'd found on the cabin walls. But now they were on at least a dozen trees, circling his home like a boundary, or a trap. He retreated inside and locked every door. The sun set painfully slow that evening, each minute stretching into dread. By the time full darkness settled, Caleb had barricaded the front and back doors with furniture, pulled every curtain shut, and kept the flashlight and hunting knife within arm's reach. The knocking didn't come at 3 a.m. It came much earlier. At 9:42 p.m., there was a sudden crash against the back door so loud, Caleb thought the hinges had snapped. He grabbed the knife and held his breath. Another crash followed, then another, each blow sounding like a body being thrown against the wood. He crawled to the kitchen and peeked through the smallest gap in the curtain. There were 3 figures outside. They were barefoot, wearing torn clothing despite the snow. Their skin looked pale under the moonlight, their movements stiff and unnatural. 2 of them stood at the door while the third was dragging something heavy through the snow. Caleb strained his eyes. It was a large object wrapped in canvas and rope. Too large to be firewood, too large to be anything animal. A person. It had to be a person. He backed away in horror, hand over his mouth. His breath quickened, and for a terrifying moment he thought they might hear it. But the figures didn't turn. They only continued pounding on the back door, testing the weakened frame. Then one of them spoke. "We know you can hear us." The voice was wrong. Deep, wavering, like someone speaking with frozen lungs. The second figure stepped closer to the door and whispered something Caleb couldn't understand. A language that didn't sound human. The third figure, the one dragging the wrapped shape, let out a long, low exhale that fogged the air. And then everything stopped. All 3 figures froze in place, heads snapping toward the cabin windows. Caleb ducked too late. They saw him. The pounding intensified. Fists slamming against wood. Something sharp scraping along the doorframe. Caleb retreated to the bedroom and pressed himself against the floor, praying the barricade would hold. Minutes felt like hours. The pounding didn't stop. It only shifted from one part of the cabin to another. Windows, walls, even the roof. It was a full assault, not an attempt to break in, but to wear him down, to make him feel surrounded. Then, as suddenly as it began, it all went silent. Caleb didn't move. He listened to the dead quiet, straining for any sign of movement outside. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Nothing. He forced himself to check the back door. When he reached it, his breath caught in his throat. The wrapped bundle was now sitting upright against the door. The rope had been cut, the canvas partially peeled away. Caleb lifted a shaking hand and pulled back one corner of the fabric. Inside was a mannequin, old, cracked, its wooden face carved into a blank, emotionless stare. Its mouth split into a crooked half smile. A strip of paper had been stapled to its chest. On it, written in jagged letters, "This is for when you're ready." Caleb stumbled back, dropping the canvas. He didn't sleep that night either. By dawn, the mannequin was gone, completely vanished. The only sign it had ever been there were the drag marks in the snow leading back into the woods, and the new symbols carved into the cabin door, larger, deeper, angrier than before. Caleb knew then he wasn't dealing with pranksters, or wanderers, or even a cult. This was something older, and they wanted him for something he couldn't yet understand. Caleb lasted one more night. Barely. After the mannequin incident, he paced the cabin for hours, trying to come up with any escape plan. The truck was dead. The nearest town was miles away through deep snow and forest, and whatever stalked him wasn't deterred by cold or darkness. They moved like they belonged to the winter itself. He waited for sunrise, thinking daylight would offer some safety. It didn't. At 8:17 a.m., Caleb heard a knock at the front door. Not pounding, not scratching. A polite, gentle knock, the kind you'd expect from a neighbor. Caleb froze. He didn't move or respond. The knock came again, then a voice, warm, smooth, almost friendly. "Caleb, we need to talk." He felt pins and needles shoot down his spine. They knew his name. They hadn't spoken it before. He didn't answer, didn't breathe. "You've been ignoring us," the voice continued, "but we've been patient. It's time." Caleb backed away slowly. The doorknob jiggled once, then stopped. Silence followed, a long, unbearable silence. He waited, knife in hand, heart hammering so hard he felt it in his teeth. Then came a sound he hadn't expected at all. The door unlocking. From the inside. Caleb lunged to the entryway. The chain lock was still latched, the deadbolt still turned, but the doorknob rotated freely, clicking as if someone had disengaged a lock that wasn't visible. He jammed his weight against the door, but it never pushed inward. Whoever was outside didn't try. they simply let the knob turn back. The voice spoke one more time, now lower, colder. "We'll come in when you're ready." Footsteps crunched in the snow, slow and deliberate, growing fainter until they vanished altogether. Caleb didn't wait for nightfall. He grabbed his emergency gear, layered himself in every piece of winter clothing he owned, and slipped out the back window, running straight into the tree line. He didn't follow the road. He didn't want to be anywhere they expected him. He headed north, deeper into the forest, hoping to circle toward the highway miles away. For hours he trudged through waist-deep snow. His legs burned, his lungs ached. Several times he heard branches crack behind him, but when he turned, the forest stood still. He wasn't sure anymore if it was paranoia or pursuit. Around midday, he reached an old service road half buried in drifts. His relief was short-lived. In the center of the road stood the mannequin. Its wooden face was now carved with a new expression, a wide, unnatural grin. Something dangled from its hand, his truck's missing battery cables tied into a noose. Pinned to the mannequin's chest was another note. "Don't run! Follow us!" Caleb stumbled back, slipping in the snow. His breath fogged in rapid bursts. He scanned the tree line, and that's when he saw them. At least 6 figures this time. Standing still between the trunks, silent, watching. Their pale bodies almost blending with the snow, their eyes dark. Too dark. He couldn't see their faces clearly, but he felt their intent. They weren't chasing him. They were hurting him. He bolted off the road and crashed into the woods again. Branches whipped at his face. Snow filled his boots. His hands went numb. He didn't know where he was going, only that he needed to get as far from them as possible. But the forest didn't help him. It misled him. He passed the same fallen log 3 times, the same broken stump twice. It felt impossible, but no matter how he changed direction, he kept looping back. And each time he returned to the log or stump, there were more footprints around it. Not his, not animals. Bare human prints forming a ring. By late afternoon, Caleb could barely stand. The cold gnawed through his coat and bones. His vision blurred. When he collapsed near a cluster of rocks, he finally accepted the truth. He wasn't getting out. He pulled his phone from his pocket, dead even though it had been fully charged. The temperature had killed it. Or something else had. As night began to fall, he heard the crunching again. Closer. Caleb pressed his back to the rocks, gripping the knife with fingers he could barely feel. The figures emerged from between the trees, silent and slow. 6, 8, maybe more. One stepped forward, the same one who had spoken at the door. A tall, slender shape with frostbitten hands and a calm voice. "It's time to come home," the figure said. Caleb didn't speak, didn't move. The figure knelt in front of him, its head tilting in a disturbing, unnatural angle. "You survived longer than most." A hand reached toward him, wrongly jointed fingers stretching with impossible precision. Caleb swung the knife weakly, but the figure caught his wrist mid-air. Its grip was ice cold, inhumanly strong. The knife fell into the snow. "You don't need to fight," it whispered. The others closed in. The last thing Caleb saw was their hands reaching for him, dozens of them, pale and shaking with anticipation. The next morning, the forest was silent again. Rangers later found Caleb's cabin torn apart, furniture shattered, symbols carved into every wall. There were footprints circling the home, bare, human, dozens of them, leading into the woods. No body was ever found. But 3 weeks later, a hiker spotted something strange miles from the cabin. A wooden mannequin, half buried in snow, carved with a familiar crooked smile. Around its neck hung Caleb's broken watch, still ticking.